All right, team. Congratulations on finishing the first genre of this course, which was fantasy sci-fi. Well done. Hopefully, you enjoyed that process of learning probably what a lot of people consider like the most hyper creative type of creative writing, which is fantasy or sci-fi. But I personally am really excited to be moving forward and moving on with it and to being able to teach some different genres. Obviously, some of you may have different feelings. Some of you may have the same feelings as me. But we're moving on to modern fiction, which is one of my favorite genres of creative writing. It's not my favorite genre, but it's one of my favorite genres. It's probably number 2 on the list or 3 on the list. And I think this is going to be a really enjoyable module. Um, this is quite a different writing style and technique than fantasy sci-fi, but we're going to carry on some of those skills, the character development skills, the pacing skills, and we're just going to be adding on some things to think about. And then throughout the next week and a half or so, we'll spend time looking at specific techniques that you really ought to try to use in your modern fiction pieces. Um, I'll get into those later, and those will be hinted at in this slideshow. But right now, I just want to give you a big overview of the bones of modern fiction. So let's start this. I highly recommend taking notes on this. I'm not going to necessarily grade your notes. Um, there will be an assignment today in addition to going through these notes. I'm going to make the assignment due Sunday just because I have a feeling I'm probably this might take a little longer than I initially anticipate, but yeah, so Sunday there will be an assignment due. All right, 4 conventions of modern fiction. I want to give you 4 things that define modern fiction writing. These are 4, I guess, big picture commonalities between modern fiction pieces. But before we can even do that, we got to ask the question, what is modern fiction? Well, I imagine you can pick up on it a little bit. Futuristic fiction is science fiction, sci-fi. Fiction that takes place a long time ago is historical fiction. We are left with modern fiction. Modern fiction, though, isn't necessarily about things happening in 2024. Modern fiction is a story that's taking place during the author's lifetime. So a lot of books we view as historical classics were modern fiction in their own time. So let me just read this definition. Books in the modern fiction genre are made up of stories set in modern settings. They have technology and events that are close to or pertain to the current culture of the lives of their main characters in a today setting. The modern genre would also include new and struggling social concepts and thought processes. Yeah, so if we take a book that's a World War II book written by a World War II veteran, that's not historical fiction. That was that person's real life story, right? If it's a true story, then it's nonfiction. But if it's made up, they based it off of their experiences, then it would be modern fiction for that time. So modern fiction is an author is writing within their lifetime a story. And of course, as this definition kind of leads us to see, the new and struggling concepts or thought processes is a big part of this. So your theme is going to be way more important because you're going to have themes that are not just about heroism or saving the world. You're going to have the themes of what we do and what society does in response to people who are oppressed or poor or marginalized. Obviously, government treatment is a theme of our dystopias. Globalization and acculturation is a big theme of modern fiction. Shifting mindsets or attitudes towards traditions. These are just examples, right? We're having a lot larger emphasis on theme when it comes to modern fiction rather than sci-fi fantasy. That theme is not really what matters. The entertainment value is what matters, not necessarily if you teach something. All right, so our very first, this just naturally segues, our very first main point is that this modern setting has a modern conflict. which leads to a modern theme. Okay? You have a modern setting, that's what makes it modern fiction. You have a modern conflict, which leads us to learning something about today's world, and that's a modern theme. Very big emphasis there. So when you write your trial right later on in this module, you should not go 1950s. You should not go BC. You should not go super far in the future. It should be taking place in the 2000s or 90s. I'd say you could go 90s if you want to, but 90s, 2000s, or forward in time just a little bit. We'll say 1990 to 2040 is kind of your window, 50-year window. So if you go too far forward, it becomes sci-fi. If you go too far back, it becomes historical fiction. And then on top of that, you really need to make sure that when you create a conflict, it's relevant to today's struggles. So obviously, the main ones that come to my mind would be racism, sexism, oppression of minorities, struggles with mental health, self-image, or the conflict between a person and a collective. This is where we get our dystopian modern fictions. But you can also go with the drama, right? You can go with a person had a breakup. Your conflict doesn't have to be massive. Your conflict does not have to be this like world domination or worldwide oppression or anything like that. You can actually narrow in your conflict to really, really personal things. It can be a person's love life story. It can be a person's struggle with finding a job or feeling like they fit in at school. It could be a person's unique experience in a modern setting. You know, maybe some of you have had some really unique experiences in your own lives that you could fictionalize slightly, but base a real story off of. Coming to a small town for college could be your conflict, so to speak. You know, the adjustment between the city and the small town and all of that. Sports, right? You can make a basketball season or a softball season or a baseball or a track season your conflict. But you have to avoid cliches if you do sports. Do not give me cliche sports stories. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I think that would naturally segue to our next point. Again, as you create characters now, you really, really, really want to emphasize relatability and representation. Representation means your character is almost symbolic of something, right? Your character functions as a character and a symbol. That's pretty advanced. I want you to just focus on relatability. So in fantasy sci-fi, you kind of create characters that were setting based. This is not natural for me to do. I struggle with that. But in modern fiction, characters that you create when you write should be relatable to the readers. So as you develop your characters, as you create new fictional names with personalities, you need to do this thing called interiority. Interiority is simply giving lots of inner thoughts, inner conflict, inner turmoil, relationships with other characters, goals, personality, interests, hobbies, loves, hates, right? You need to give me the most. Your characters have to be thorough here. Your characters have to be good to do modern fiction right. Because I need to forget that I'm reading a character and I need to believe I'm reading about someone I haven't met. It's in a modern time, okay? I could meet this person if they were real. That's how I need to feel. It is like, oh, yeah, this person's just like me. Or this person's not like me, but I know someone like them, right? Relatability, y'all. Relatability. And then that representation piece is that if your character relates to you but represents another group, that's a great strategy as well. Okay, so that's point number 2. Let's keep moving. Excuse me. I have an example of interiority here. This is from Paulo Coelho's Alchemist. This is a really great story. Maybe some of you have actually read it. I'm not sure. But this is a modern fiction. I take that back. It's historical fiction. I guess that's a really bad example. I just broke the genre. This is taking place a long time ago. But I really love this paragraph, so I'm going to read it to you. This is an example of creating a character that's really, really relatable, really thorough, tugs at the heartstrings. All right. The sun began its departure as well. The boy watched it through its trajectory for some time, until it was hidden behind the white houses surrounding the plaza. He recalled that when the sun had risen that morning, he was on another continent, still a shepherd with 60 sheep, and looking forward to meeting with a girl. That morning, he had known everything that was going to happen to him as he walked through the familiar fields, but now, as the sun began to set, he was in a different country, a stranger in a strange land, where he couldn't even speak the language. He was no longer a shepherd, and he had nothing, not even the money to return and start everything over. All this happened between sunrise and sunset, the boy thought. He was feeling sorry for himself, and lamenting the fact that his life could have changed so suddenly and so drastically. I love this depiction of the boy. We have this boy who in the morning knows what he's doing in life, knows his job, he's a shepherd, looking forward to meeting a girl, and now he is sitting watching the sunset and lamenting the fact that life changed so much. So beautifully written, too. Very simple writing, right? This is not advanced writing. That's why I love Paulo Coelho. He really, really makes simple sentences beautiful, just like Ernest Hemingway. He makes simple sentences beautiful, and somehow this character comes alive in the simplest of forms. So, yeah, I feel connected to this boy. I've never been a shepherd. I've never lived in that time period, which, so again, this is historical fiction, not modern fiction, so I'm kind of breaking the rules here a little bit with this example. But I've totally felt like life changed so quickly that I've lamented the fact. I've totally had that experience of like my day looked way different than I expected it to, and my life shift. So yeah, I mean, it almost is like when you start thinking harder about it, it's like, wow, it's kind of some emotional moments in my life were just like this. So yeah, that's it. Relatability is key, y'all. Relatability is key. All right, next is tone. This is probably the fun part, I think. This is stylistic, not necessarily content. Modern fiction, because it wants to be relatable, because modern fiction is trying to connect with the reader, you are invited to have a tone that is less formal and more familiar. Okay? Again, since relatability is the goal, you can write like you speak a little bit more. You can kind of go informal. What does that mean? Well, it means, your grammar is going to change a bit, right? You can still have your long sentences, but I want them to be simple. Short sentences can also be used. You can have like a stream of conscious sort of writing style where things bump into each other a little bit. Again, you don't want like run on after run on, but you can have a purposeful run on. Grammar becomes a bit more of a tool for you to use rather than a list of rules for you to follow. You can use fragments, you can use fractured sentences, you can start with and, but, or. And here I have the comment, think Hemingway. If you ever read Ernest Hemingway, you realize not everything that Hemingway wrote was grammatically perfect, but was very straightforward, very understandable. You almost read the story in the way that you think, and yet at the same time, Hemingway crafted it so that you were thinking like the characters were thinking, and you could almost hear their voices come to life. And it was really, really, Hemingway's writing just totally has this tone of familiarity and relatability that's just untouched, in my opinion. I love Ernest Hemingway. So many authors have tried to be Hemingways. Even Paulo Coelho mentioned earlier, Cormac McCarthy. So many people look at Hemingway and they're like, I want to write like that. So yeah, tone is key. Here's a great example of tone from J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It was a modern fiction when it was written, and this is what J.D. Salinger's very first sentence is. Look how long this thing is. Look at the grammar he breaks too. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. I just can't imagine like this sentence creates the character in one sentence. We understand our main character so well already. Yeah, if you really want to hear, I'm going to tell you a story. You're going to probably want to know like the backstory. You're going to want to know like about where I came from, my parents, and all that kind of garbage. But I don't feel like going into it. We have a amazing character in Holden Caulfield. Boom, right there. I love this. Right, the grammar is not perfect, but there's a tone here that's familiar, less formal. Familiar and less formal. Particularly if you're from the East Coast, right? Because this is a really East Coast style of writing. If you're from the East Coast and you read this, you go, oh yeah, that's how people talk in Boston. You know, yeah, that's totally how people talk. It feels great. It feels relatable. Again, familiarity, not formality. All right, and then finally, I just want to bring up modern fiction texts. You don't need a perfect conflict resolution. In fantasy and sci-fi, if you don't resolve the conflict, you're left hanging. It's a cliffhanger. The story cannot end. An end of the world story needs to end with the world ending or being saved. A world domination story needs to end with the world being dominated or saved. There is not the option to just stop. But in modern fiction, you actually have more of an option of how you want to end your story. Look at these. Look at this list. Brave New World, 1984, Blood Meridian, Life of Pi, Handmaid's Tale, Yellow Wallpaper. These are 6 of the most famous modern fiction stories written recently. I guess 1984, Brave New World technically are sci-fi, but because they take place in. But anyway, I guess Blood Meridian's 10. I have some bad examples, you guys. I'm realizing that right now. Anyway, these stories just cut off. They cut off and they leave you with a pit in your stomach. The conflict is not resolved. The ending is not happily ever after. It's either a cliffhanger or the worst outcome possible. And it leaves the reader feeling this outcome not change. And again, remember, this conflict is meant to be a real life, real world conflict. So when it ends that way, it leaves you feeling like the current circumstances are unacceptable. I've got to put my book down and go change this. That's the idea. Again, my examples are horrible, you guys. This is not all modern fiction, so I'm doing a horrible job. We have some sci-fi, we have some historical fiction, very little modern fiction here. But the idea of these books is if you have a theme-focused story, a lesson is being conveyed. Happy endings don't always help. So, yeah. Is that it? I think that's my whole slideshow. Not my most organized slideshow of all time, but it's a slideshow nonetheless. We're going to practice tone. This very first assignment on Moodle is going to be a tone assignment. We'll work on it. In-person students will work on it Wednesday and Friday. Online students, you just work on it, get it done by Sunday night. The idea of the tone assignment is I really do feel like students, you probably have been taught to write in a formal academic style for most of your life. And so I'm going to try to push you to change tones a few different times. So you'll see the assignment. You're going to be writing in several different tones through that assignment. So it's available online and it'll be available in person, hard copies in class. You can choose the format you would like to do it in. All right, y'all. Cheers. See ya.